I want to thank the conference organizers for allowing me to speak to you today, because amateur radio is the center of gravity for emergency operations, when all else fails. Listening to the other presentations this morning reminded me of a concept I learned in the Army called the revolution in military affairs. The idea that some technological advances are so big that they fundamentally change the way organizations do business. It is in amateur radio and thought-provoking forums like this digital communications conference that are the incubators for these types of revolutionary changes. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. First, a little bit about my background. Years ago, I was a communications major at the University of Illinois and even got my first-class FCC license. Then I was in graduate school in urban planning and policy with an emphasis in community development. Studies at that time showed that residents in poor urban neighborhoods seldom ventured outside their own areas and felt isolated from the world outside. So for my master's thesis, I proposed a 10-watt community-based radio station so local residents could get the kind of targeted information they needed to help themselves and each other and feel less alienated. But I went on to other things, and the 10-watt radio station went by the wayside. But after all these years, the 10-watt radio station idea has been resurrected, but with a modern spin, to create a new paradigm in emergency communications that can hopefully increase situational awareness while simultaneously giving the local communities the tools they need to successfully adapt and survive during a disaster. This new paradigm in emergency communications can be summarized in two thoughts. What we don't know can hurt us, and we're all in this together. First, let's talk about what we don't know and how it can hurt us. An earthquake and tsunami swept over Japan on March 11, 2011, leaving 28,000 people either dead or missing. Residents of one coastal village ran up a hillside to escape the sudden rush of high water. Unfortunately, what they didn't know was that the wave of water was higher than the hill, and they were all swept away. Hurricane Katrina was one of the deadliest and costliest natural disasters in U.S. history, killing at least 1,800 people and causing about $81 billion in property damage. In New Orleans, in what has been called a catastrophic engineering failure, the storm surge pushed its water over the tops of nearly every levee in the city, killing 700 people. First responders were at a loss because they had no actionable intelligence of the situation during those critical hours as the levees were failing and the floodwaters were rising. Because of the massive scope of the devastation, federal assets were stretched, and the search for the missing was therefore relegated to local authorities with their limited resources going door to door. As a result, the search for the missing went on for months. By October of that year, 700 bodies had been recovered, and to this day, 135 people are still categorized as missing. This past June, a violent series of thunderstorms called the Derecha struck my local tri-state area of D.C., Virginia, and Maryland. It toppled thousands of trees and power lines. At least 5 people were killed, with 3 heat-related deaths in Maryland alone. Internet and cell phone service was disrupted, and over 1.25 million people were left without power for up to 1 week. The storm also knocked out Northern Virginia's 911 system for the entire weekend, so residents in that area were unable to place emergency calls. However, amateur radio operators stayed connected, advising each other on such mundane but important things like where to find an open grocery store or gas station that took cash, because the automated teller machines did not function without power. Especially troubling, one older ham asked if anyone knew where he and his wife might find an open cooling shelter, because without power, the record-breaking heat wave in June was particularly dangerous to the ill and the frail. The amateur radio community stayed in contact, helping each other, but others outside this close community did not have the same system of support. Over half of the American population lives within 50 miles of the coast, and 14 of the world's 17 largest cities are located along a coastline. Seattle, Los Angeles, and San Francisco are all built on major earthquake fault lines. By statistical averages, Los Angeles alone is overdue for the next big one. With an estimated population of 37 million people in Southern California, a major natural disaster could kill between 2,000 and 50,000 people and cause billions of dollars in damage. NASA funded a study in 2009 that forecast a 12% probability that a catastrophic solar storm will hit the Earth in the next 10 years. Many in government, including the Department of Defense, are looking closely at the possible consequences. We don't know what will happen, but if it is powerful enough, it could significantly damage our power grids, GPS, and satellite communications. In our highly technical society, this could mean the inability to provide even basic provisions of food, water, and fuel for days, months, or even years before full recovery. A friend of mine attended a Department of Defense briefing on the subject a couple of months back and was pretty shaken by it. I asked her what she would do to prepare, and she said, "I'm getting more ammunition." I think there's another option. We need to get better emergency communications into the hands of private citizens so they can help each other, and also integrate that community communications network with the first responders so that they can keep each other informed even as the crisis unfolds. The Department of Homeland Security has highlighted core capabilities it believes are necessary to effectively respond to emergencies. These include situational awareness, a common operating picture, and resilient communities. So let's take a look at these three. According to the National Response Framework published by the Department of Homeland Security in 2008, situational awareness is the first requirement in an effective response plan. You need to have the right information at the right time to make the right decisions and take the right actions. Situational awareness is also the toughest thing to achieve, especially in the first moments before disaster strikes and the first hours after. Time is of the essence in the first moments before a disaster to warn people and instruct them on life-saving measures, such as seeking shelter or climbing high enough to avoid rising water. In the first hours after a disaster strikes, when people are dying and buildings are burning, every minute counts. But it is this critical time period that first responders, police, fire, and emergency medical teams typically have the least amount of information on which to act, causing needless delays in which more lives might be lost. Of course, the residents in the stricken areas know immediately what is happening to them and their neighbors. They can see the water rising, or the buildings burning, or the trees falling. And they need to be connected to each other and to the first responders to get that real-time, actionable intelligence to the places it can do the most good, to each other and especially to the first responders. Building situational awareness, however, is only the first step. While detailed information of a crisis as it unfolds is critical, it can quickly turn into information overload, overwhelming decision makers and resulting in wrong or delayed decisions at critical junctures. Therefore, to avoid information overload and needless delays, the vast amount of information received needs to be consolidated into an effective, real-time decision-making tool called the Common Operating Picture. The Common Operating Picture takes the information collected for situational awareness, filters it, makes computations as necessary, and presents the resulting findings in an intuitive format that can be mutually shared by first responders, government officials, and private citizens in the local communities. The information could include such things as topography and atmospheric conditions, GPS locations of citizens and first responders, priorities of response activities as they develop, including resources required and where they are available. It also needs to be accessible in a mobile format for real-time response. Collecting information for situational awareness and developing a common operating picture through an integrated approach with the active participation of private citizens ultimately results in community resilience.